So we're gonna start with the basics of integration designer. It totally revolves around the concept of SOA and SCA. Okay, so we have been so we discussed a little bit about SOA, SCA, and the other terminologies, but we'll just have a recap of that, and we'll be discussing more in details. So what is SOA? What do we understand by SOA? Okay, so if you understand it on a high level, right, it totally revolves around the concept of clients and servers, right? So
Okay.
we have servers which declare or define a set of services, right? As you talked about granular set of services, right? The services which can be visible on that. We have a set of services which are defined by the set of servers, and we have clients communicating with those servers for getting the services of those invocations that we have defined. Okay, so with that, when we say they are loosely coupled, they do not have a tight contract point to point communication. We can replace those servers as long as, so you said the contract has to be redefined. So that is not right. Contract is not to be redefined. Rather, any server or client, as long as they fulfill the same contract which is defined between these 2 points, they can be very well replaced, and they can be very well loosely coupled, and we call them a well-defined interactions as long as they satisfy the prototype or the contract of the interaction, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So if you can just see on the slide, right? So we hide the implementation details from the service invoking application. Service invoking application is nothing but the client which is making the request for executing those set of services from the servers, right? Provides a common service definition independent of specific technologies. So that's what it is independent of technology. It doesn't understand the server is working on Java or what technology they're working on. And that's where the concept of mediation comes into the picture, right? The enterprise service bus, we'll be discussing it in detail later, right? So your server might understand different. So there's lots of background noise from somebody. Okay, it's better now. Thank you. So I was saying, my server, the server which is offering the service, might understand a different set of data and different set of protocols, right? But the client which is requesting the service from the server might understand different set of data and different set of protocols, right? To help mitigate this differences, to bridge this gap, we have a mediation layer in between, or the ESB layer in between, which we'll be discussing later. Okay, so if you see on the screen, we have point to point connectivity, which is a very brittle, right? So if the point is broken, if the service is down, we have a kind of a failure there. Then we have enterprise application integration hub and spoke, right? So we have a dedicated centralized point which is talking to n number of different services. But again, the architecture is brittle in a way that if one of those points is broken, that particular individual service will not be available. Then we have an enterprise service bus architecture wherein we have service oriented integration pattern in picture, right? We have an enterprise service bus in between, which basically mediates between the clients and the servers, so that the clients or the servers, I mean actually the server which is providing the service, can be replaced without the client being aware. So I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say a client makes a request to execute a web service, right? And that web server is down. Okay, so that web server is not able to fulfill that request. In that case, we can very well replace that web servers with another web servers which offers the same set of services, as long as they fulfill the contract, right? So the contract is that they should be able to understand the same set of things that the client is sending, and they should be able to fulfill the response with the same set of data that client is expecting, right? So in a way, this particular pattern is loosely coupled. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've been, so service is at the core of service oriented architecture, right? So everything is about services. we create services, we implement services, and then we request execution of services, and then we fulfill the execution of services. Service is a self-contained entity that has a distinct business function. So I gave you an example of a web service, right? So let's say a web service to find the temperature of a particular city. Okay. So this can be considered to be a service, and the service has a definite function that it tells you the temperature of a particular city, given the city name and all that, right? Should be based on the standards, right? So it should fulfill the industry standards, like we follow WS-BPEL and all that, which we'll be covering in later sessions. A building block for composite applications that share information within and beyond the enterprise to incorporate customers, suppliers, and partners, right? So a service can communicate within the organization. It can also communicate outside of the organization, right? Because, right, so that's how a service is. If the particular business function that the service is fulfilling is interacting with the systems within the organization, then we say that it is a kind of a service interacting within the organization. Otherwise, it can extend that boundary as well, right? If it needs to interact with the outside systems as well. Then SOA, as we discussed, architectural pattern to build distributed systems, right? So those systems are distributed in a way. We might have one system here, right? And one system might be placed somewhere else, right? So they don't need to be physically located together. So I hope you understand the distributed systems, right? So the distributed systems, distributed technologies talking to each other over the network. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So SOA transforms IoT infrastructure into flexible, reusable, and standard-based services. So we understand that being loosely coupled, it is a flexible pattern, and because we have fine-grained services, those services are reusable, and they follow the industry standards like WS-BPEL and the other standards that are there, right?
Okay.
SOA separates interface technology from implementation. So again, this point basically tells that the client making the request will not be aware about the implementation of that particular service, how that particular service is implemented, right? So because we don't need, the client doesn't need to be aware, they should not be concerned about the technology into which they are implemented, or we don't need to develop any composite applications to kind of integrate with them, right?
Okay.
So guys, this couple of sessions, initial couple of sessions are gonna be a bit of theory, right? So I know it will be a bit boring and all that, right? But this is necessary to kind of go ahead to go ahead with the further exercises and practical hands-on sessions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So
Yeah.
these terms and terminology you need to be aware, because we will be using these terms and terminologies very frequently into the later exercises that we'll be doing in the later sessions, right?
Okay.
The key to the business agility is reuse, and okay, so this is basically telling the same thing, right? So we need to design our coarse grained or fine grained services into in a way that they are reusable, flexible, and loosely coupled, so that we can address the changing business priorities, right? Okay, so we have a set of component composition, invocation, and data, right? The data interactions. So there is a particular standard object within Integration Designer, which we call SDO. SDO stands for Service Data Object. Okay.
Okay.
So service data object is a main object which is used for data manipulation within your IBM Integration Designer. Okay. Then we have service component architecture, SCA, the middle layer into the diagram that you look at it. This is basically a framework, right? A technology framework, right? A technology framework that will standardize or define how the service invocations will be made, irrespective of how those services are implemented. Exactly. So it basically defines the contract and tells you how the invocation will be made, and it is not concerned about how those services are implemented actually. Okay,
Okay.
so it's not concerned about the underlying implementations, but it exposes the contract and defines how the invocations will be made. Yes, so you will have exports and imports. Will be coming to those points, right? So you'll be
Okay.
having exports and imports into your IBM Integration Designer. When we have those components, import is basically used to consume some functionality out of something else. Okay, and
Yes.
export will be used to expose your own functionality. Okay, to
Okay.
expose your own functionality to the rest of the world. Okay, so because they are basically the communication mechanism, export and import, they have a number of types, which we call basically types of imports and exports, right? So we will have web service import export, we'll have SCA import and export. Okay, we have HTTP import and export if you want to expose as REST and all that. So we'll be covering those in detail later. Okay, then we have WS-BPEL, Web Services Business Process Execution Language, right? This is again a standard, an industry standard, which allows you or defines how the services are to be orchestrated. When I'm saying orchestrated, I don't know if you understand the meaning of orchestrated. So when we say orchestrated, how those are to be designed or to be clubbed together into a meaningful form, right? Like we orchestrate our business process diagrams into BPM.
Yes, completely understand this point.
Right, so creating meaningful diagrams or the flows or the service flows which can execute using your invocation patterns use on SCA and using your service data objects for data manipulation. Okay, WS-BPEL, Web Services Business Process Execution Language, is an industry standard. Okay, this is used to define how your service flows are to be orchestrated. Okay, so you can also think of orchestration as the creation of your flows, creation of your service flows. Okay, so yesterday while we were discussing, I gave an example of a leave application, right? Wherein we have a number of steps connecting one after the other, right?
Yeah.
So that you can think of as an orchestration of a BPD. Okay, creation of a business process diagram workflow.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
similarly,
Yeah.
when we come to integration, right, we talk in terms of services, right? So we talk in terms of services and we talk in terms of orchestration of those services. So how that orchestration works actually is defined by an industry standard called WS-BPEL.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So this diagram will basically define the process integration in the SOA reference architecture, right? So we have ESB at the heart of it. So if you see Website Enterprise Service Bus, right? This is the underlying mechanism which talks to your a number of different systems and services. So we have business services at the top, right? Then we have interaction services, process services. So your ESB is basically a backbone which allows your application or your system to talk or to communicate with the rest of the systems within your organization. Okay, within your organization or out of your organization as well, as we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Right?
So
So we
this ESB is part of the IID, or is it a separate entity like the IIB Enterprise Service Bus by IBM, right? So we are considering this out of the scope of our Advanced Integration Designer. Is it that way?
not exactly right. So and in fact, not at all. So enterprise service bus is is the very underlying mechanism on which your IID stands.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So anything that we will be doing, right? Anything that we'll be doing in IID is basically an enterprise service bus functionality,
Okay. Okay.
or rather, I will say most of it, right? So website enterprise service bus (ESB) is basically, it also makes a runtime. Okay, because at runtime your mediations and everything will be converted into executable languages, right?
Okay.
So if you understand website process server, okay, or IBM Process Server, right? So
Okay.
IBM Process Server has a built-in ESB.
Okay.
Okay. So anything that you do on IBM Integration Designer can be deployed and executed on Enterprise Service Bus.
Okay.
All right, as well as it can be deployed on or IBM Process Server.
Okay.
Okay, and then there is a difference. There is a difference that your mediation module. So we have two different types. We have mediation modules and we have business processes, short term and long term.
Okay.
Okay, so your mediation modules can be deployed on Enterprise Service Bus (ESB), but your business processes always need a process server runtime to execute.
Okay.
Okay, because mediation modules are much closer to the concept of Enterprise Service Bus, so they can execute on Enterprise Service Bus, which which is again an underlying mechanism within process server itself, but they are not internal, right? So they are the other way around exactly. So they are completely out of scope. Okay,
Okay.
and while the diagram shows them, it basically tells that the applications that we create using ESBs, right,
Yeah.
or the enterprise service bus mechanism runtime can talk to a number of different services, which might be your business services like BlueWorks Live.
Okay.
I hope you understand BlueWorks Live,
Yes.
right? So it can talk to your BlueWorks Live, it can talk to your process server like process services. Okay,
Okay.
they are separate they are separate softwares, if you understand it that way. Okay, so
Okay.
they are separate software. So we have website information aggregator. Okay, this is again a separate software from IBM itself. This is again a separate software from IBM itself. Your enterprise service bus can talk to that as well. And then we have a IBM portal server. This is again a separate set of softwares for providing your web UI capabilities and user capabilities and all that.
Okay.
Your enterprise service bus can talk to that as well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Now I understand. I understand.
Similarly, there are service registry, right? I don't know if you heard about WSRR.
No. No.
No, no idea.
Okay, so WSRR is Web Service Registry and Repository.
For the services, web
Web,
services.
Web Services Registry and Repository.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so this is basically again an IBM software. Okay, as a standalone IBM software. It can be used to manage and govern your web services, right? So ideally, when you integrate with web services, you need to provide a visual endpoint, visual URI, right?
Okay.
So those visual URIs can be managed and governed by your WSRR, by your service registry, and then whenever your application requires them to run, those endpoints can be supplied dynamically through WSRR. Okay,
Okay.
depending on a number of different criteria that your WSRR can function upon. Okay, so that's a
Okay.
different story about WSRR. Just to give you an overview of I'm telling all this. Then we have again towards the bottom of it, we have a number of infrastructure services like IBM Partners Gateway, IBM Application Server, Website Application Server, and Website Adapters, and HATS. So HATS is nothing but Host Access Transformation Services. Okay, so these are again set of access services which your website enterprise service bus can talk to and communicate with. So this basically is telling that having your enterprise service bus at the core of your application design, you can talk to a number of different systems and create an enterprise application integration kind of a pattern. This is what we are trying to explain here. So IBM Process Server is a very broad domain. Okay, it contains lots of different things, right?
Okay. Okay.
Contains lots and lots of different things because everything that IBM provides, most of those softwares run on VAS. Okay, process server.
Yeah.
Yes.
right? Even, I mean, again, your process server is implemented on WAS itself. Okay. So again, your ESB is part of that website application server itself, or I would call it process server itself. But this capability is required by your mediation components to execute. So again, we will not be directly specifying anywhere that we are using ESB or we are using process server, but this is the underlying mechanism which will be used when we deploy anything on the process server.
Okay.
Getting my point now, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on. SOA development and process management, right? So we understand what a business process looks like, right? So this diagram shows a very simple process: receive loan application, check credit rating. If the rating is good, send loan approval email. If the rating is not good, it will go to the manager for review application, and then so on. Then send loan rejection email, right?
Yeah.
So if we understand what a business process is, a business process is basically any set of connected activities that make a meaningful sense for an organization or give some meaningful output to an organization. Okay. So this particular business process that you see on the screen in front of you is basically being used by a bank, okay, by a banking organization for receiving loan applications and either accepting or rejecting it depending on a set of criteria,
Okay.
right? So we are just trying to understand what BPEM is, and then we'll come on to how SOA development fits into it. So there might be, into a business process, there might be a number of different interaction steps where we need to interact with different systems, right? So the second step onto the diagram, if you see, it is a check credit rating, right?
Yes. Yes.
This check credit rating this step might need to talk to an external system to retrieve the credit rating of a particular customer for which the loan application is received. Getting my point?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just repeat, right? So within a business process, all the integration components that we will be creating, they will at some point execute within the context of a business process. Okay. So executing an integration component without supplying that data into a business process makes very less sense. Doesn't make any sense at all, in fact, right? So
Yeah.
any sort of integrations that I'm doing with the external systems to retrieve some data, to update some data or something, that needs to be fed into a business process so that the business process can use it, right?
Yeah.
So while we are looking at this diagram, the step check credit rating might need to interact with an external system to retrieve the credit rating of this particular customer who has applied for a loan, right?
Definitely. Yes.
And when we need to talk to the external systems or the systems within the organizations using system layer, that's where your SOA or the integration patterns come into the picture. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So this was the point here. Okay, so we have a number of development tools. If you see the diagram on the right hand side, so we have a centralized mechanism. Because the reason we need to talk about process center and process server here is because your integration designer is part of the IBM BPM itself, right? So IBM BPM comprises of these two components, process center and process server. Okay, so let me just put some more light onto it, right? So process center is not a runtime, right? It doesn't have any capabilities to run anything. The only reason it can run something is because it contains an instance of a process server, and we call it process center server, if you heard about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
call it and we call it process center server. So it is not a process server, but maybe an instance of a copy of a process server embedded within the process center. That's why a process center can run your processes,
Okay.
right? And so other question is, how does your integration designer work with the process center? So anything that you create into integration designer, okay,
Yeah.
is ultimately gonna execute in the context of a business process.
Yes.
Okay, so I gave an example of a check credit rating on a previous slide, right? So that check credit rating will, so if you just look at this slide, right? This check credit rating, the second step will execute in the context of this complete business process, which is a loan application, let's say.
Okay.
Okay, so because it has to execute in the context of a business process, it should be attached or associated with the business process somehow.
Yes.
Okay, for that, what we do is there is a component called Advanced Integration Service, AIS.
Yes.
It's a component within your IBM BPM. You can create an AIS within Process Designer. Okay,
Yeah.
when I'm saying we can create it inside Process Designer, we can just create a template of it. The template just contains a name, any set of inputs and outputs required by that AIS, and any set of error data associated with that service. Okay, we
Yes.
just we just define these set of things into Process Designer, and then we need to implement this service, this AIS. For implementing, we need to open your process application into Integration Designer. Okay, so
Yes.
when you open your Integration Designer, you can connect to a Process Center repository. You can provide your URL of the Process Center, your username and password to connect to the Process Center, and then you can open your process application into the Integration Designer, and then you implement the Advanced Integration Service into Integration Designer. Okay, wherein
Yeah.
you write your own set of codes and other things. Once you have implemented it, you you need to publish it back to the process center. So you don't publish it to a process server or anything. You said we got an option to publish it to a process server or to a process center. So we need to publish it back to the process center. When we publish it back to the process center, the AIS implementations that you created into the Integration Designer gets associated with the application that you created into the Process Designer. But even if you have that, right, even if you have that, so there are two things, right? One is the library of your process application, which will contain your Advanced Integration Service. Okay,
Yes.
so the only way your business process can invoke the integration functionality is through AIS. There is no other way.
Yes. Okay. Well,
Okay,
I understand.
right? And for your process being able to execute an AIS, it needs to have a copy of it. That copy should have an implementation associated with it. So that implementation is to be associated with the business process or the business process application. Web service is exposed by your integration designer, or doesn't matter, it is exposed by your Java application, or it is exposed by your .NET or anything else. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
as long as it is a web service, your IBM BPM process designer can still talk to it,
Yes.
right? But again, that communication mechanism is not Advanced Integration Service.
Yes. That's not advanced integration. That for that we have to do it separately. Like as you said, it should be imported from process designer to integration designer.
Exactly. So in that case, it is a simple web service, right? So
Yes.
it hardly matters that web service is implemented into Integration Designer, or it is implemented somewhere else,
Yes.
right? Your BPM will still see it as a web service. It doesn't need to know where it is coming from and all that.
Yes. Yes. Understand. Understand.
Clear to you, right? So you would understand this diagram, BPM repository, process center at the center of
Yes.
it, which will allow you to do versioning, sharing assets, server registry, which is again kind of interacting with your WSRR kind of a things. You have process design on the left hand side and the integration design on the right hand side, and then your overall cycle is design, deploy, measure, and deploy.
Yes.
Measure and improve. Sorry, right? Okay. So I was just trying to see, right? I was just saying it there and all that. Okay, so we just started talking about it. This diagram is pretty much what we discussed on the last slide. So the overall life cycle of a VPM system is design, deploy, measure, and improve, right? And this is an endless cycle, so it goes on. Okay, so there is no definite end to it. We design our processes, we deploy them, then we keep monitoring them, we measure their performance, and then we keep improving our systems, right? With those monitoring data or the measurement data that we receive, we improve those systems,
Okay.
right? And then we design again, we deploy again, we keep monitoring again, and then we improve again, right? So this keeps going on, and anything that we deploy using process center runs onto the process server. Process server is the runtime, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Process server is the runtime for anything that we create on the process center using your development client, process designer, and integration designer. And if you see, your process server contains an ESB. If you see on the right hand side, the bottom right, so your process server contains ESB inside it,
Yeah.
right, at point number 5. So this is what we discussed, and it contains a number of other things, which is BPMN, BPL, rules, monitoring, process portal, business space, and optional Microsoft add-ons. So you're exactly. So this is for your IBM BPM itself. I mean the process design itself.
What about the human tasks that we can build in the Advanced Integration Designer? What is the portal for them?
Okay, so there is business process choreographers.
Okay.
Okay, there are explorers, and there are set of consoles available there as well, which you can use. When once we have created those templates into your process designer, we start implementing those templates into integration designer. We create those associated set of implementations, and those implementations have to be published back to your process designer for your process business processes to be able to execute them. Okay, and
Okay.
then it is also possible to have your mediation modules, your set of integration services created into standalone modules, which can be deployed to your process server as standalone EARs, enterprise archive files.
Okay.
Okay, those enterprise archive files can be deployed onto process server, and because your business processes will also be running on the process server, so they can still communicate to those services running on the same process server. Okay, so do you understand that we can create a standalone services into integration designer? Okay,
Yeah.
and then those standalone services can be deployed to the process server as EARs, enterprise archive files. We can export them as EAR from the integration designer, then we can deploy them.
Okay.
Okay, and then the AIS implementation that we create into the integration designer can be published to the process designer from integration designer. It is just a reference to those implementations, not the actual implementation. Okay,
Okay.
just name of your standalone modules and all that. So those things will be there. We publish them back to the process designer. From the process designer, your business process will be deployed again to the process server itself. Okay,
Okay.
so your business process having the references of the integration designer implementation is deployed on the process server. Also, your standalone integration services are deployed on the process server. Everything is on the same server. So with the help of those references which are there into the AIS, it can still talk to the standalone integration services which are deployed on the same server.